Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. I hope you're feeling well and you're in a good place. We're going to continue with the Lankavatara. And today I want to talk about what I've often mentioned about words and meanings, and Shakyamuni talking about this. He speaks quite a lot about it in the Lankavatara. And I suppose I want to give you a bit of a... I reiterate this in so many ways, so many times, but I think it's important. You may happen on this video first before anything else. So translators and translations, languages, translations after previous translations throughout different cultures, different languages. Shakyamuni understood. Even though he's taught this Buddhism orally, and the training in Buddhism was a recitation, a repetition of the meat of the sermon. And with each, because he taught many of these sutras over 8 years, 10 years, he didn't recite the exact same sermon each time, or he would, but he would always, because of the region, the differences in the regions and the peoples that would attend, he would add other elucidations, other context, other stories, which in general are in the sermon. He would simply elaborate on them. So what you would have is people throughout India, for instance, who would have the core verses of the sermon. They would memorize them, identify them, make them absolutely the words of Shakyamuni. But then there would be these contextual elaborations, and they might be slightly different. They memorize them nonetheless. But what happens over hundreds of years, think about that, when they finally get to a point where the society you remember part of the inculcated fear after when Shakyamuni became extinct, when he passed away, right? There was tremendous fear that his teachings would be lost. And so the exegesis to capture them in a script, some kind of writing, became ritualistic. And in Gandhara, in the northeastern region of India, which is now shared by 5 different countries, I believe, there were rituals where scribes were paid to write down word for word these recitations, and then they would take these scribed, written versions of those recitations, fold them, roll them, put them into big clay pots, and bury them for the future, for future generations. And a lot of that, just recently, the last decade or so, have been dug up in the Gandhari region, and many different scripts were found in different collections, whether they be individual collections or universities or academic or governmental archives. And scientists of different sort have been poring over them, trying to resuscitate some of them because the folding, the papers are degrading, and so, but they've been kept together over thousands of years because they were in a sealed pot. But there's moisture in the pot, and they're in different conditions of decay, and they're finding chemically that they can fix a lot of it. And so there's translations in a variety of languages. And there seem to be, some very consistent, like the sermon itself, but then some slightly variations of expressions of the same things in different ones. So this is the scholarship of Buddhism, right? Or at least a portion of it, the academic portion of it. But there's also the realization that over hundreds of years, as these same translations are found in a certain state in Gandhara, whether they be in Pali or Gandhara had its own script that it used. Shakravit. I don't remember. Suffice it to say, there were different cultures and languages at that time that were translating these things for their cultures and people to see, understand, and make a dedication to the future with. I don't know how better to say that. But then you have later translations into Chinese and into, what's the language of Tibet? Oh my God, my brain isn't working. Anyway, and then those languages, as we know, documented when these teachings went into China, Chinese translators like Kumarajiva were having to deal with these words that there were no parallels for in Chinese. And so they had to really understand conceptually what Shakyamuni was expressing with these Indian words. So they had to learn Indian languages in order to get really familiar to identify what this word was conceptualizing, and then either find combinations of words in Chinese that would do the job, or in some cases even invent a new word in Chinese with the definition implicated in the Indian word. No small matter. And then, of course, from Chinese, there's the Northern Chinese, the Southern Chinese. And I'm not a language expert, but I know there are differences, just like from Mandarin to Manchurian. Manchurian? See, I'm not a language expert, but I do know, being born French, learning English, and learning Spanish, that words, though they can carry meaning, are viewed slightly different in not only the words themselves, but the meaning of the words themselves as you move through languages. And there are ways in French to express certain meaning that require more than one word that in Spanish would be similar but different, and in English might be just one word, and vice versa. So much later, when English scholars from the UK would find and study these teachings and scripts, they would impose their own cultural biases and ideas on what these words mean. And so it becomes difficult, in a way, for us to study in our day and time And look at the way English has changed over its history, right? And we read these scripts, these texts, and we tend to just take them as read without imposing the history of these teachings throughout. Now, Shakyamuni knew this as he was teaching. He told his listeners over and over again, as you recite this, forget the scribes, as you recite this, remember that as you're learning these words, he realized that recitation, memorization attaches you to words, right? But it's a great mechanism for really holding on to information. And he exhorted his practitioners to say, look, you're learning these words, you're repeating these words, you're studying Buddhism. But as much as you're memorizing and reciting these words, understand that it's not the words themselves that carry the meaning. The words have meaning, but what you need to seek as you study Buddhism is the meaning of the assemblage of the words. What does the teaching mean? What insight is being mined through these words with their meaning, right? A shovel digs. A shovel in its own way has a meaning. It is a digger, it digs, it can go through some things but not others. There's all sorts of charisma and meanings and definitions for what is shovel, right? Even different cultures understand shovel differently. But that's not where the teaching is. What is it about shovel that is important to the meaning? Is it the digging? Is it the apparatus of digging? Is it what is found by digging? Here is where your mind needs to go in order to understand the teaching, right? So I'm doing my own thing right now, same thing as he was. Suffice it to say, he exhorted his people to look for meaning, not the meaning of the words or the words themselves. So, as you've already witnessed in the Lankavatara, there's a lot of dissection going on how we think. Or, to put another way, what does it mean to think? What are we doing as we think? What's our objective? So, having said all of that, we are reading a translation of the Lankavatara by a Japanese man who's translated this into English as somebody with a strong affinity to Chan, or in Japan, Zen Buddhism. So what are the odds, do you think, that he's going to take every opportunity in his translation to see things? I don't mean that he means to obfuscate the meaning, or that he's thinking, I'm going to convince people that I'm right, or that Zen is right, or whatever. I'm not, whether he did or didn't isn't the issue here. Remember, I read the foreword by one of the editors of the book, who made it explicit in print in the beginning of the book that he had his doubts about some of the translations. Clue, right? So as we read this translation, certainly I can point out by sentence where Mr. Suzuki took it upon himself to make assertions with the sentences and words that don't really sound like Shakyamuni. Or at very least, that if it was in Shakyamuni's sermon, he would have couched it in plenty of context. Now, this is where what Shakyamuni's exhortation is critical. Again, Shakyamuni says, study broadly, study it all. Don't get hung up on the words or the meaning of the words. Look for the meaning of the teaching. His confidence was, no matter how these recited words would shift in meaning over time to different cultures, different peoples, certainly he was aware of that. That if you were to look for the meaning of the teaching instead of the meaning of the words or the words themselves, that his sermons were long enough and detailed enough that the context and the understanding, the insights of the sermon would be obvious. They would be there, they would come out. The concealment is accidental and an attachment in itself of different cultures and ways of being, but the meaning would bubble up. It would come through. So, I say to you, as we study this book on the Lankavatara, be aware, as I am, as I read to you these different passages, that for every blessed one, I say Tathagata or Bhagavan or Shakyamuni. I don't say blessed one because that's an illusion. That's a word trick. That's a promoting a certain way of looking at Shakyamuni as some kind of deity. And he's not. He's just a man, by his own description, who's attained a realization of mind. And the Lankavatara is all about that. So to call him that is a specific device. Right? So be aware. And I will do as much as I can to make these words come out free of that bias. Now you may say, well, that's your bias. Go ahead. Go ahead. I am trying to get the meaning out of these teachings for a modern audience, our time, our ability to understand and capture the meaning of Shakyamuni's teachings. And by using Shakyamuni's own logic, I'm telling you that the meaning will bubble through. Doesn't matter. I'm just trying to ease the pain for people of this time, my time, our time, Nichiren's time, to understand without the clouds of obfuscation, as clearly as I can put it, what he means. So, it's funny, I'm going on and on about this, but what I want to read about today is exactly Shakyamuni's words on this. So, you don't have to take my word for it. Okay. So Mahamati says, the word discrimination goes on by taking place by the coordination of the head, chest, nose, throat, palate, lips, tongue, and teeth. These are the words of Shakyamuni Buddha. So, like I said, he's going to dissect this for Mahamati. Because Mahamati says, please tell me, Bhagavan, about the conditions whereby the word discrimination manifests itself. So obviously I'm jumping into the middle of a text here, but you'll get it. Where, whence, how, and by whom do words indicating discrimination take place amongst the people? So how is it? Do you ever notice, we've all had parents, right? One parent, two parents, a substitute parent, a grandparent. All of us were parented, whether it's in an organization like an orphanage or biological parents. There is parenting happening. As a society, we parent. Okay? So here again is the meaning of words. When we say parent, what are we saying? We're saying this, the shaping influences on the young mind, which takes a tremendously long time to develop fully so that it can become an autonomous being in the world. Someone say the brain is still developing on into the age of late 20s, 30. That's incredible. But certainly we don't think of turning a person loose till they're 18 as some captured intellectual self-propagate, a whole human, right? To send a 10-year-old out to get a job, create a domicile, and enter into sophisticated relationships, that sounds idiotic, doesn't it? For some countries, they do send out their children at the age of 13 as adults. Here in the West, we look upon that as kind of a violation of childhood, don't we? Suffice it to say that the human brain takes a long time to fully develop. And all the activities around that human brain that influence it are, in effect, parenting. And to take that to its logical extreme, you're parented till the day you die, because you're constantly influenced and affected by the society you're in, the government you're in, the economics that you're in. Right? I mean, that's an obvious statement. Not obvious when we talk about parent. We tend to identify another human as that. So let's stay there for a few moments. I will talk about my own experience. Mother, father, I had both. I remember vividly, I don't know exactly what age, but I know it was prepubescent. It was probably somewhere between age 11 and 13 when this started to really dawn on me. By that time, I had started to logistify my parents' behavior. My mom was a certain way, my father was a certain way. Now, for girls, I would argue, as they often do, they get this much sooner than boys do. They learn very early on who they can manipulate and how. Boys tend to be more secure in doing what they want to do, so they don't analyze as well. Not true for everyone, but go with me for a minute here. My point is that who my father was not a collection of his words. It was a collection of my exposure over several years of what he meant, his subtle body movements, his eyes, the sound of his voice, the inclinations, declinations. There's so many physical cues that I could read from both my parents that I had a sense, a deep sense, for who and what they were and how they expressed themselves, that the words only became obfuscating of that or ancillary to that. That my father could spout absolute gibberish in words, being a French Cajun guy who learned English. It wasn't broken English as much as it was odd English, occasional words that would come out oddly, words he couldn't seem to say correctly. And by that, also the construct of a sentence coming out of his mouth. To me, when I was young, I understood what he meant right away. But as I got past that 13 threshold into, after puberty, 13, 14, 15, I became very, very in tuned to words from schooling, from my own reading, from my own ability to pay attention to words. That's when I really understood the gibberish that was coming out of my father's mouth. It made me bust out laughing a lot. Yet I still knew what he meant because I had all this other backlog of information about who, why, what, the way that Hector was Hector. That was my father's name. Now, without going through all of that with my mother, and I'm getting to my point now, this was a constant thing in my house too. Constant argument, yelling, Latin blood, I guess. I constantly observed by that point that 99% of the arguments that were going on between my parents was because they absolutely didn't understand each other. My dad would blah, blah, and my mother would blah, blah, blah back, and the two were like not ships passing, like a ship and an airliner in different parts of the world. It just had no clue what each other was saying. And Hector, for the way he was, just said the same thing louder. And here's the key to when you know this is happening, and you and I do it too. You're not hearing me. Yes, I hear you. You said that. And then, well, yeah, that's what I said, but that's not what I meant. Oh, here we go. You don't hear me. You don't understand me. You never understand me. You're even digressing to, you're an idiot. You don't. And, you could see some of that frustration wasn't just about, hearing my words back pisses me off because I understand that I didn't express myself well. I don't want to be told I'm an idiot, so you're an idiot. Right? But here's the thing. It took a relatively short few years for me to understand who Hector was and how he expressed himself so that I knew when he said certain things, and I became occasionally the interpreter. No, Mom, what he means is. And then I would either get back, no, that's not what he said. Oh, well, then he should have said that. I still got the resistance, right? Because my mom has her own set of illusions and wordsmithing. They never were going to understand one another. And yet, they spent 30 some odd years together. And they still, to this day, my mother's in her mid-80s. They have a global kind of sense for who the other was. But they still can't. I can still tell my mother, no, what he was this. Well, whatever. I don't know, They still don't understand each other. It's amazing to me. So as a Buddhist, I have this very visceral example, this personal example of how fallible communication is. And I did a video a dozen years ago on ego versus mind. And I think I would retitle it now, Ego Mind versus Awakened Mind. But one of you guys, Tammy, you pointed out to me that and I don't remember the particulars of that video. I'd have to go watch it again. But I understand that I spoke a lot in that video about how we misunderstand one another in relationships. So I have a long history with reading this Lankavatara and other teachings about word mind discrimination. And with my own example in life. And she made a comment that this is essential teaching for parents to understand with their children. And she really hit the nail on the head, because where we're confronted with this most viscerally is with offspring, our children, and our parents. As I was giving you my example of seeing clearly how distant they were from, they weren't even attempting to understand each other. They were just recoiling from each other. And then I thought, man, I have a daughter. And there were beautiful, amazing moments where I saw my daughter understand me better than I could communicate with words. She would say things and I would go, holy my, she's observant. She understood that and coalesced it into just a few words as a 7-year-old that I could have spent all day talking about. I know, unbelievable, right? What an amazing thing parenting is. It confronts us immediately with our, what we would say, our deficiencies, but they're not our deficiencies. They're the deficiencies of our ego mind. See, relax a little. It's not you that's incorrect. It's your ego mind that's enforcing incorrectness. And what a co-teacher our offspring are at immediately going, there it is, right? She pushes my buttons. He pushes my buttons. Yeah. Freaking great. Thank you. I get to destroy my illusory ego. I'm humbled by your ability to point it out. By the way, you have your own. Let's not lose sight of that. So here we go. Let's get into it, shall we? Mahamadi says, are words to be considered different or non-different from discrimination? Well, to you and I, that's an obvious, right? But this is Mahamadi. He's going to drive this into the ground. Like, what are you, thick? But understand, this is a sermon. This is the indication of how thick we can be. We can dissect things beyond all meaning. Are you saying words are different than discriminating? How do we discriminate if we can't use words? At what point does discrimination become the improper use of words or the proper use of words? How do we discriminate and put it into words? Right? They're all valid questions, but it gets exhaustive, right? So Shakyamuni says, they are neither different nor not different. Why? Because words rise, Mahamati, with discrimination as their cause. As you discriminate, you think up expressions to convey them. They cannot have it for a cause. In other words, you don't think grapefruit without first... The grapefruit isn't created from you saying grapefruit, nor is it discriminated by you saying grapefruit. Grapefruit, the word, is risen by the discrimination of that's a grapefruit, not something else. If you're trying to come up with a breakfast food, you might say grapefruit. but it comes up from the discrimination of what is a breakfast food. And you go, well, Sylvain, I wake up in the morning thinking grapefruit. Yeah, because you're thinking of something to satiate whatever desire you have. This is what he's saying. Then, if they are not different, words cannot express the sense which they do. Therefore, words and discrimination are neither different nor not different. Like, I feel like I just ate grapefruit. There's the dryness in my mouth. Right? It's a seesaw. Then Mahamati says, again, are words themselves the highest reality? Or is what is expressed in the words the highest reality? Oh, come on. Mahamati, words are not the highest reality. Duh. Nor is what is expressed in the words the highest reality. Oh, why? Because the highest reality is an exalted state of bliss, and as it cannot be entered into by mere statements regarding it, right? I'm now going to be in Buddhahood. No, doesn't work that way. Words are not the highest reality. Mahamati, the highest reality is to be attained by the inner realization of noble wisdom, a different kind of wisdom, an insight. It is not a state of word discrimination. Therefore, discrimination does not express the highest reality. And then, Mahamati, words are subject to birth and destruction. They are unsteady, mutually conditioning, and are produced by the law of causation. And again, Mahamati, what is mutually conditioning and produced by the law of causation cannot express the highest reality, because the indications pointing to the distinction between self and not self are non-existent. So what does all that word salad mean? If you've been paying attention so far, you should understand that once again, he's talking about the conditioned mind. All the way back to karma, the initial formations from energy. How you come to say the word chair or wall or apple isn't an imperative. It's different for every one of us, especially culturally and across the world, in different ways of understanding what is wall, what is chair, what is apple. Some apples that you swear this is apple don't even exist in other parts of the world. So they will conceive of a different word or the same word for a different discrimination. These are constructed ideas and thoughts, and therefore constructed words, because they inculcate a certain meaning to them. And that layer of meaning is just language, it's just words. It's not a real thing. You can't invoke apple, right? Words are these indications that do not express the highest reality. Further, Mahamati, word discrimination cannot express the highest reality, for external objects with their multitudinous individual marks are non-existent and only appear before us as something revealed out of mind itself, which is, again, what I'm just saying. Your perception of the very same apple is different than my perception of the very same apple. It just is. We understand juiciness and peel and color through our own karmic filters. Karmic because those decisions go back beyond our birth. It points to the amalgam of energies that we instantiate. That's just the process of life. Constantly we're confronted by our limitations of self, identity as an individual unique unit. We have individual unique characteristics, but we are not individually unique. We're just part of this huge process that is life. We're just a little speck of it, a portion of it. It's such a hard thing to describe. And this is over and over again where Shakyamuni finds himself with Mahamati. But here's the key thing, and this is the danger of a Zen translation, is there's a slight implication here that the real world is an illusion. And that is not at all what Shakyamuni is talking about. He's talking about what you call a real world and what I call a real world are constructed in our individual minds. He's not saying the real world doesn't exist. He's saying that you're hung up, we are human beings, hung up on what our mind perceives to be that world. That's why you hear statements like, in the 10 worlds, we talk about our specific universe, my universe, your universe. And that confuses students all the time. But it's this distinction between your engine of perception and my engine of perception. And when we chant Myoho Renge Kyo, we transcend that perception of reality to a universal perception of reality, the real real. That's what we do when we chant to our mandala of Gohonzon. That's what Gohonzon is. It takes all those individual perceptions and pushes them to one side. You don't hear them or see them or think them anymore. Time stops. And clearly, without your perceptive monkeys, filters, veils, whatever you want to call them, we all see Buddha single-mindedly desiring to see Buddha, to meet with the Buddha, to have the mind, the regular mind of samsara take a pause and see with the mind of Buddha. And the Lankavatara is working extremely hard to identify that, but it's easily missed. Zen people, this is the stumbling block. Because it's easier to pretend that nothing is real than to deny your ego that, oh yes, I'm real. And I simply need to perceive the non-real. What a magical formula that is. You totally missed the boat. I know, those can be controversial words, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to harm anyone's ego or feelings, but that's what this book is about. Identifying that error. Let me jump ahead here, because I'm taking a lot of time. On another completely other section here, I don't want to get too repetitious here, but I mean, this whole book is about it, so I can't compete with that. So once again, Mahamati won't let this go. And now we're well into the book, past, well, around the midpoint. According to you, depending on the attaching to the dualism of being and non-being, there evolve views characteristics of wrong discrimination, as when the magician produces varieties of people that are not at all real and complete objects. Thus, signs of existence and non-existence are falsely imagined and go on so imagined. But in fact, existence itself is devoid of discrimination. You see how this is slippery here? Existence itself is devoid of discrimination. That's not saying existence itself doesn't exist. That's saying existence, and these are his words he put in brackets here, but in fact existence itself is. So if I remove that and just say thus the signs of existence and non-existence are falsely imagined and go on so imagined, devoid of discrimination, that reads a little more true, doesn't it? That the world exists, but there's an imagined existence of that world, which is in the perceiver of with the samsaric mind. That doesn't deny the existence, it simply colors it specifically, discriminated. If so, how does one come to cherish the dualism as held by a man of the world? He's so stuck. Mahamati, discrimination indeed does not evolve, nor is it put away. Why? Because there is no evolving of discrimination as regards being and non-being, because the perception of objective realities is not real. Why don't you get this? It's in the mind. Because all that is seen is to be recognized as nothing but the mind itself. Again, he's saying the same thing. Mahamati, discrimination does not evolve, nor is it put away, but Mahamati, for the sake of the ignorant, who are addicted to discriminating the multiplicity of things which are of their own mind, it is said by me that discrimination, whose first function is to produce effects, takes its rise owing to the attachment to the aspect of multiplicity as characteristic of objects. Another word salad, but he's dissecting it so profoundly for this student that just can't seem to let it go. How, otherwise, Mahamati, can the ignorant and simple-minded have an insight into the mind itself which they discriminate and see themselves freed from the notion of an ego and what belongs to it, and also freed from the wrong conception of cause and effect? And again, how can they recognize that there is nothing but mind itself and cause a revulsion at the inmost seat of consciousness, Sitasraya? How can they have a clear perception of all the stages and attain the inner realization of the Tathagata, which transcends the five dharmas, the three svavapas, and the idea of reality as well as discrimination? For this reason, Mahamati, I say that discrimination takes its rise from our attachment to the multiplicity of objects which are not real. Not that the objects aren't real, but it is the multiplicity and the attachment to it that is not real. And that emancipation comes from our thoroughly understanding the meaning of reality as it is, and also the meaning of multiplicity of things which evolve from discrimination. See, it's a gross misunderstanding to say that existence is a void, because right here he's saying that how can an ignorant person who is on the path to awakening, take the word awakening itself, if there is no real objective existence and that everything you perceive is in the mind only, then what are you awakening to? Does it mean that when you awake from the dream, you're in the void? There's nothing, including you? Of course not. Why would he dedicate so much language to this? Those who regard the world as evolving from causes and conditions are attached to these notions as well as to the fourfold proposition, fail to understand my teaching. The world cannot be predicated anywhere as being or as non-being or as being and non-being, as is discriminated by the ignorant who regard it as subject to causes and conditions. And there he's talking about a world constructed of your idea of it. our idea of it, my idea of it. That idea is created in the mind. In other words, it's created by the logistics of discrimination of the mind. This is not that, that is not this. The world doesn't work that way. Life does not work that way. It is a constant flow of energy being formed instantaneously and then unformed. It's a process. It's a flow of energy. The moment we put the brakes on that and go, this energy is this energy is that, this is no longer there. It ceases. But we insist on seeing things where they are enduring. Time. We keep applying space-time to everything, when in fact space-time is just our lens of perceiving a flow that is constantly in moving. It's not the same. It's not this point moving through time. It's this point and then this point and then this point. Birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. It hurts the brain to think about what we see around us as a process, not a thing, not a noun, a verb. It's a construction. All things are unborn because they are born of causation. Anything that is born of causation is an effect. And from an effect, nothing is produced. It keeps digging. From an effect, no effect is produced. If you assert this, you commit the fault of a double effect. And this double effect being untenable, no existence comes from an effect. You can't hear a noise and then make it. The noise is an effect of something that creates it. And then it's gone. If the effect continues, then there's a new cause for it. It's a moment-to-moment thing. The mind, the norm, is the abode of self-nature, which has nothing to do with a world of causation. Of this norm, which is perfect existence, and the highest Brahma, I speak. An ego soul is a truth belonging to the thought construction in which there is no real reality. The self-nature of the skandhas is also a thought construction, and as there is no reality in it. That whatever reality you assign to it is exactly that, is mind-made. The sameness is our four kinds. Individual forms, cause, the coming into being, and the sameness of non-ego is the fourth. These are the subjects of discipline for the yogins. There is a state which is, now that's again in brackets, removed from all philosophical views, free from imagined and imagining, of no attainment and of no birth. This I call mind norm. Of neither existence nor non-existence do I speak, but of mind only, which has nothing to do with existence and non-existence, and which is thus free from intellection. Now, he couldn't have said it more obviously. It's not that there isn't a process of life and of existence. It's just the nature of it is moment to moment. What he's speaking of is mind only, trying to describe and dissect in an effort to, with dissection, invalidate its premise for life, the path to Buddhahood. Multiplicity of objects evolves from the conjunction of habit energy, karma, and discrimination. It is born of mind, but is regarded by people as existing outwardly. This I call mind only. So as you conceive of it in your mind, you make it permanent. You make it a reality, your reality. That's of the mind only. The external world is not. And multiplicity of objects is what what is seen of mind, body, property, and abode. These I call mind only. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on. He just, how many ways can you say it? What's this last thing I bracketed? Further, Mahamadi, I will tell you about the features of jnana, absolute knowledge, and vijnana, relative knowledge. And when you and other bodhisattva mahasattvas are well conversant with these distinctive features of jnana and vijnana, you will quickly realize supreme enlightenment. There are three kinds of jnana: worldly, superworldly, and transcendental. Now, worldly knowledge belongs to the philosophers and to the ignorant and simple-minded who are attached to the dualistic views of being and non-being. Superworldly knowledge belongs to all the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, learning and realization, who are attached to the notions of individuality and generality. Individuality, right? Their ascension is arhat. But that's still ego. Transcendental knowledge, which is free from the dualism of being and non-being, belongs to the bodhisattvas and takes its rise when they thoroughly examine things of imagelessness, see into the state of no birth and no annihilation, and realize egolessness at the stage of Tathagatahood. So, again, Buddhahood is a state of mind. It's an elevated, awakened state of mind that realizes, finally, that all of this is a process of which we have the tremendous privilege in this form to realize, to experience, without permanentizing, thingifying, making permanent. Just participate, observe, appreciate this life process as is, without grasping it as thing, whole, in our minds. Quiet that mind and see all as process. It ceases to affect or be influenced, because what you influence is the worldly knowledge to get to this exalted awareness, awakenedness. That's the Lankavatara. And with that, man, these talks just go on and on. I apologize. I hope I made sense. I can only tell if I'm making some sense to you if you let me know in the comments. Debate it in the comments. Tell me what you think. Don't be afraid of correction, because correction is how we all learn. It's not that I try to correct everyone, but you know, that's the nature of question and answer, isn't it? You question something, somebody introduces another piece of information, you can then take it as a correction to your own thinking, or you can take it as an addition to your own thinking, or a conversion of your own thinking. It doesn't have to be confrontational, right? We all, after all, want to reach this point of enlightenment. We're all going for the same goal. However, I will add to that since we're studying this from Lotus Sutra practitioners, we know what the answer is already. Now be dang if it isn't more chanting. Because with chanting, we achieve it immediately. But for some of us, stubbornly intellectual, we need all of this intellectual jibber jabber in order to discombobulate our adherence to logic and understanding. That's okay. I'm guilty of it. That motivated this channel. But we can just experience it. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. It really is that immediate, that simple. Now, the difficulty, I will tell you, is in your confidence that that is what's happening. So however you need to build your confidence, your resolve in Myoho Renge Kyo, we'll do it here. We'll talk about it. We'll read other sutras. We'll read things outside of Buddhism if you have a good reference to point to. We'll do that. As long as I'm alive, I'm going to be looking for different ways to open this door, because we're the only ones that are in the way. Our mental conceptions of the realities we create are the realities that trap us to emotion, to sadness, to happiness. Happiness, I mean, as exalted experience that happens momentarily. We want a steady state of awe. That's what we want. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. There it is. All right. I'm going to quit now. I will see you in the next one. I appreciate you guys. I can't even measure. Thank you for being here and your support. Like, subscribe, share. I always roll my eyes when I say that because it's such an earthly thing to do. At any rate, enjoy your practice. Stay healthy. Be kind. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.